Okay, we're go. Thank you. It's always a pleasure coming to Boone County. We lived in Boone County for about 8 years or so, so it's like coming home again. And it's always wonderful speaking to the Boone County Historical Association. Now, it's one of the most active historical associations in the Northern Kentucky region, and coming out to the beautiful library here. So tonight we're going to do a couple of things, but I'm going to start you out just with a little information about the ORVILLE Project. What is ORVILLE? And when I say ORVILLE, does it bring up anything in your mind? I mean, do you think of anybody that you grew up with, or maybe you flew planes for, or you learned about in high school?
Yeah.
Orville Wright, that's who you're actually supposed to think of. Of the two brothers, Orville and Wilbur, Wilbur died younger. Orville carried on the legacy of manufacturing and doing all the patents and all of the wonderful fun stuff. But some years ago, I guess it was 5-6 years ago, Dave Schroeder, who is director of the Kenton County Public Library, and many of you know Dave, he and I were talking and saying, gee, we really hate the fact that the Ohio River Valley has been kind of relegated to the status, not by us, but by people beyond our watershed, of being a sort of backwater. Have you heard the term Rust Belt before?
Yeah.
A Rust Belt. And have you also maybe heard the term flyover country? Okay, politically. And we said, we're tired of it. And we want to, what caused that in the first place? Well, some of it is true, right? Some of it is obviously true. Factories have closed up and down the Ohio River Valley watershed. But a lot of it is totally exaggerated, and a lot of it is due to the fact, as many of you know, being young, budding historians, right, that our history of the United States really was not necessarily written by people here in the Midwest or the Ohio River Valley watershed. It was written by people maybe more towards the east and possibly more towards the west, right? So when we studied the history, we really don't know how to put it in to the larger context of world history and also of American United States history. So the Ohio River Valley, the ORVILLE Project, grew out of those conversations. And it grew out of the fact that we were interested mainly in the innovation that occurred and is continuing to occur in the Ohio River Valley. So let's take the first 4 letters. Ohio River Valley Innovation. And then we said, every self-respecting nonprofit organization needs an acronym that's easy to remember and that should solicit the kinds of responses and what could possibly fit ORVILLE. So then we forced the other 3 letters and we said it's Innovation, Library, and Learning Engagement. But now we're glad we forced it because it is centered at a library, Kenton County Public Library. On site, they host it for us. It's a volunteer project, and more, you're going to find out towards the end how we are leading the pack in innovative and learning engagement activities.
Let me get a slideshow first.
Okay, there we go. What is the Ohio River watershed? It means all of the tributaries that flow into the Ohio River, which includes parts of 14 states, and some of those states border on the Ohio River. So, you know, all the tributaries, like around here, would include the Licking River, and the Great Miami River, and the Little Miami River, and they all then pour into the Ohio River and put so much water into the Ohio River that the largest amount of water coming in at Cairo, Illinois, where the upper Mississippi is joined by, I'm being very careful how I say this, where the upper Mississippi joins the Ohio River. How's that?
Right.
There's actually more water pouring into, they should have called it the Ohio River.
Yes.
Okay, that's it, that's all. So, but it's not, it's the Mississippi River. So all the way from Pittsburgh, where the Allegheny and the Monongahela join to form the Ohio River, and then take all those tributaries of the Monongahela and Allegheny and all the tributaries of the Miami and all that. And then you have an area that about 30 million people in the United States, so not about 9% or so of the population of the United States lives in. And it includes all these cities along the watershed.
You need to make it a slideshow. It's not.
Oh, I did make it a...
Go up and, yeah. you make it
Gosh,
a
what an
slide
idiot
show.
I am. Sometimes I leave my brain at home.
And then you can go start.
All right, I am so sorry, Cheryl.
Keys.
How embarrassing and foolish. So anyhow, the Ohio River Way is another organization, and these two pieces, the Ohio River Ways History and Heritage Committee, grew up at the same time. They're siblings, they're almost identical twins. They literally grew up side by side. They're both headed up the Ohio River History and Heritage Committee by me and about ORVILLE, so it's hard to tell where one starts and the other begins. The Ohio River Way is another organization, however, that is trying to preserve, conserve the Ohio River routes in order for it initially to be a national waterways, okay? And it did just achieve this year, it's only one of very few that are actually this big. It is a national water trail recognized by the National Park Service. And the 308 miles that were recognized go from Ashland, Kentucky, all the way down to West Point, which is just west of Louisville. So this is a big, big deal, although it probably is not going to bring a lot of money right now. And this is along the same order, Janine, as Big Bone in national landmark status. It's a big deal, and there will be many celebrations and hopefully ideas to help conserve the waterway. But already in the state of Ohio, through the Appalachian Regional Commission and through grants, hundreds of millions of dollars last year and this year are being spent on waterway projects throughout southeastern Ohio. So that's the map, sorry, that I was showing you before. These are some cooperating organizations with ORVILLE. To be a cooperating organization of ORVILLE is the simplest thing in the world. That's all it takes is some officer of, who is responsible for an organization to write me an email and say, we would like to be considered a partner, there is no cost, and here is our main website, please add us to your organization list. Then we will add you and we will keep you apprised of everything that is happening. So we have the Boone County Public Library, the Campbell County Historical Society, the Kenton County Historical Society. We'd love just to have a quick email from Boone County Historical Society and give us your website and we'll add you as a partner institution. Now tonight we're going to talk about the power of two. You know how they say two's company, three's a crowd? And just to show you how important the Ohio River is, and I'm not starting with American history, I'm starting with world history. And we're going to continue to promote that as well as American history. We're going to talk about two little islands, two major world wars, and if you think they're World War I and World War II, you are wrong. Two treaties resulting in two of the world's largest land transfers, 2 secret treaties, 2 major results of the French and Indian War, 2 major results of the War for American Independence, and 2 major defeats for the U.S. Army. And we're going to do that all in the next 25 minutes or so. So go ahead and put your seatbelts on. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do, were you ever taught about the French and Indian War? What did they usually say about the French and Indian War? They go, well, there were some French and some Indians and the British, and then the British won and the British got a lot of territory. I like to say that doesn't at all put the Ohio River at the focus, because it is about us, baby. It's about us, the Ohio River watershed. It started in the Ohio River watershed up in the Pittsburgh area. And it's because 2 imperial powers, the French and the British, wanted us, the Ohio River watershed, and they wanted control of the Ohio River watershed. Never mind the fact that there were some other people already here, okay? So, it actually escalates into a major world war. And for those of you who were fortunate to study European history, it is called the 7 Years' War in European history. And this thing is fought all over the place, including India. And this is where the British really made inroads into India, you know, and eventually they would take over India. And it's ended at the Treaty of Paris in 1763, which results in one of the world's largest transfers of land. So now we have, I promised you, 2 major world wars. You got your first one. And I promised you 2 islands. So we're going to go ahead and look at those 2 islands. Does anyone know if there is currently any place in the continent of North America that is still owned by France? Should I do a Jeopardy thing? Do, 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 do. No? Yes, there are still 2 islands off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada that are owned and controlled by France, and they did not want their independence from France after World War II. And so they are still a department of France. And if you go to them, you will not hear the French dialect of Quebec and other places in Canada. You're going to be going literally back in time that is more like France today than it is like French Canada is. And those 2 places are called Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. Now you have something for Jeopardy, you have trivia. I've given you now 2 islands plus 2 things to add to your bucket list. I want, before I die, to go to Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. And you have to take a ferry out to see them. Why do I mention them? Because in one of the world's largest transfers, at the end of the French and Indian, or the 7 Years' War, all of the land east of the Mississippi River, except for 2 small islands called Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, and the city of New Orleans, went from French ownership to British ownership. Again, never mind the fact that there were other people there that disagreed. And then in 1762, we get the first secret treaty. This is of Fontainebleau. France ceded New Orleans and the extensive territory of Louisiana to the west of the Mississippi River to Spain in compensation for dragging its relatives, the Bourbon family of Spain, into the war. So, at the end of the war, which by the way started in our watershed and was largely over imperial control of our watershed, then spilled into a world war. You can see what happened. This is before. The British colonies are in pink, before the war. And that is all the British possessions. They even got Canada, right? And Florida after the war. That is one of the world's largest land transfers. And that little red dot there is Cincinnati, which didn't exist yet, but we just go show you where it is, right? Two results of this war. And the first one is, in one of the great ironies of history, this tremendous territorial gain for Britain would ultimately lead to one of its biggest losses. Now that it had all this territory, it had to make certain of two things. One was that France didn't go creeping back into it and take it back. And it had to worry about Spain there too, in Louisiana. So it had to defend this territory. That's a lot of new territory to defend. So what are they going to do to raise the money to defend the territory? They're going to do what everybody does: tax, tax, and more tax, right? And just the Tea Act, this Act, the Stamp Act, just add them all together. And American colonists didn't like, and Americans still don't like, taxes. They didn't like the quartering of British troops, because they had to bring a lot more British troops over here to keep this territory. So they didn't like that either. But then Britain had another problem. And that was all of these antsy people in Virginia and North Carolina, South Carolina, and they all wanted to move west beyond the Appalachian Mountains, and that would really upset the American Indians. So they said, the king set up a proclamation line of 1763. That proclamation line was about us, the Ohio River watershed. It was about keeping European settlers, British settlers, out of the area where we all are now. Because if they went out there, they were going to aggravate the Indians, and then there would be warfare. Guess what? Like I said, neither one of those worked. The taxation didn't work, and the proclamation line of 1763 didn't work. People kept going out there, and there were couple of the earlier Indian wars that occurred right before the American Revolution. Now, the American War for Independence, or we call it the American Revolutionary War, is not really going to go well. So they're upset by increasing taxation. The colonists rebel. It's 250 years later. You know that story. And things are not going very well at all. Because 1777 is like a really bad year for the Americans. Because the British just went right on into Philadelphia, the nation's capital, and they took it. And it would take a while up in New York in 1777 and a victory there to kind of turn things around so much that the French finally decided, hey, we can go ahead and make a treaty with the United States where we will provide military apparatus and people for the army and generals, as well as money to help finance the American Revolution. So they did that, and things began to turn around. But things really began to turn around in that same year after, 1778, because the French waged another world war against Britain. We do not think of the American Revolutionary War as being a world war, but there is a whole other side of the conflict called the Anglo-French War, or the Bourbon War, between France and between Britain at the time, and also involving France's Spanish relatives in Spain. And they are fighting this war all over the place. The West Indies, the East Indies. They're fighting it in the Mediterranean. France was even planning an ill-advised and didn't go well invasion of England across the English Channel. So the American Revolutionary War blows up into a much larger conflict, and it's that conflict that finally resolves in 1781 with the surrender of the British at Yorktown. And then we go and have one of the biggest land exchanges in history again. So we promised you 2 world wars. We've really been marching along here. You got 2. You got your 2 world wars. You got your 2 islands, right? Now you've got one of the secret treaties. Now you're getting your second major transfer of territory, and that's going to be that literally almost everything east of the Mississippi River is going to go ahead and become the United States of America. And there's going to be a little bit down there, you see, along the 31st parallel, that is claimed by both the U.S. and Spain. Not real good that that's happened, because, you know, that means that there's going to be some possible conflict down there as well, and disagreements. Now, the first result of the American War for Independence. So if you're following along on your connect the dots, we said that the French and Indian War was about us, right? We also said that the Treaty of Paris ending that war was about us. And that due to us here in the Ohio River watershed, the American Revolution largely occurred because Britain had to defend all of us, right? This whole new territory. Now we're going to look at how the American War for Independence leads to 2 other really big things. And one of them is more war. And the other one is more war. So take your pick. The one has to do with war against other nations, and the other has to do about war against domestic nations of American Indians. So when you consider that the infant republic of the United States was facing enormous odds of even surviving, you can see that in what we're going to look at here. The French Revolution was largely caused by the amount of money that the French royalty went into debt for to pay for the American Revolution and the Anglo-French War, which were really about the aftermath of the French and Indian War, which was about, if you don't say it, I'm going to keep you here another hour or 2. It was really about us. So, the king decides he has to call the Estates General together, the 3 estates of France. And it's kind of a loose thing. It hasn't been held for since the 1650s under Louis the 16th, right? Or Louis the 15th, excuse me. Louis the 14th. I knew if I kept doing them, Louis the 14th. They haven't called the Estate General for about 150 years. And they're not too happy because they're noblemen and all that, and they're going like, we got a lot of grievances here. And they've been kind of building up for 150 years, right? When people let things build up for 150 years, it's not so good. And so, you know, the king and the queen end up losing their head. And then things get really weird in France, right? Because what always happens in history, nobody ever learns from history. I don't even know why we teach it anymore. I'm just going to propose that we stop teaching history because no one ever learns from it. But anyhow, it always swings from the left to the right to the left and never kind of gets into the middle, right? And stays any time in the middle for any time long. So they start doing some interesting things. We'll just say interesting things in France, right? And all of a sudden, people back in the United States are going like, oh, it's getting weird. They didn't use that term back then, but if they had, it's getting weird. And we think they're really gone off the rails, which is another anachronistic term because they, you know, didn't really have rails. Well, I guess they had some horse kind of rail thing. But so they're saying, let's kind of back off from these people. I mean, they were real nice and everything. They sent over Lafayette and some generals and gave us bunches of money, boatloads of money to win our war. But now they're really going off the rails. And so President Washington actually had a proclamation of neutrality. And then things were getting worse because we still had all kinds of problems with Britain. Britain still had soldiers and troops stationed in what would be our Northwest Territory. And they still hadn't agreed to, you know, some of the boundaries of the United States. So we send off Mr. J, and he does a treaty with Great Britain that really is going to kind of solve our problems. They're going to get out of what was in 1787 the Northwest Territory. They're going to get their troops out, and they're going to give us most favored nation in terms of trading. And then, you know, Jefferson and others in the administration say, well, gee, that's really not fair. That's playing favorites with Britain, and it's not fair to France, and France is getting kind of mad. And then they go, well, now we need to do something for all those people out there in the Ohio River, Mississippi River watershed, because they just want to be able to bring their little flatboats and other boats down the river and to New Orleans, and they want free deposit of goods in New Orleans. They want to make certain that they don't have to pay a bunch of tariffs at New Orleans, right, to get their goods out. So they said, now we need to send somebody to Spain. So by the Pinckney's Treaty, or San Lorenzo, between Spain and the United States, they solved that little nasty, you know, area that they were arguing about. And they also say that you can put any of your goods, Americans can, they can bring them through the port at New Orleans duty-free. There'll be no duties, there'll be no tariffs. Well, now, by this time, France is getting upset with us. And we actually start with them, it's called a quasi-war. Now, let me ask you, what's a quasi-war? I mean, you know, what is a quasi-anything, you know? So the whole idea of this was we're sort of at war, but we're really not at war. And lots of things happen, and they end that war, and then they follow it up. So 1800, Napoleon signs the treaty. Okay, our quasi-war is ended. The next day, he signs a treaty, a secret treaty with Spain, and says, you know that 38 years ago by secret treaty we gave you Louisiana? Well, now by secret treaty 38 years later we want to do what's called a retrocession. And they say, you know, what's a retrocession? And he goes, well, it's a fancy term from give Louisiana back to France. You know, if you use fancy terms, you know, and send a lawyer down, you can convince people, right? So they sign on the dotted line. Now, all of these secret treaties, you're going to ask the one question. How long did it take for the secret to get out? Not long. So, you know, everybody then really gets mad because of the secrecy, right? You know, so you're just really aggravating nations one after another. But, and I ask you, and I have to leave you kind of on the edge of your seats for two reasons. One, we can't do it all in one night. Two, I don't feel I've done my job unless you are on the edge of your seat. You know, unless you still have lots of questions. But why did Napoleon want Louisiana back in 1800? Did he just, because he wanted to like really get back at Britain? He was involved in the French Revolutionary Wars, and he was going to go back into Haiti, and then he would make, and I'm giving away the rest of the story, down in Haiti, he put down a revolution by Toussaint Louverture. And he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring back slavery. And boy, did that bite him in the seat of the pants. It got worse, and then he goes, I guess that wasn't such a great decision. And then all of these people out here in the Ohio River watershed are going like, guys, that Pinckney's Treaty is up for re-signing. And you know the Spanish have closed down New Orleans to us again, and we don't care who takes care of us out here in the Ohio River watershed. Y'all can govern us, whoever wants to govern us can govern us as long as they can get New Orleans opened up, right? And so there's some shenanigans going on. And they're going like, well, how can the Spanish close down New Orleans when they've signed a secret treaty that they're giving back New Orleans? And the people around here are going like, don't care. The only thing we care about is New Orleans being open to our goods. So then it leads to sending a delegation of a couple of guys over to France in 1803. And they're going like, do you think you might want to kind of sell that Louisiana Purchase? Isn't it kind of like maybe a thorn in your side? And Napoleon goes, you're right, and sells it to us. Now Jefferson is a Democratic Republican, or whatever they called him back then. He was the opposite of a Federalist. He was small government. So what does Jefferson do? He gets an offer for the Louisiana Purchase, and he's got on his shoulder a little angel and a little devil. I'm not going to tell you which one is which. You decide yourself. It's your story. And one of them says, you know you're for small government. There's nothing in the Constitution about buying the equivalent of, oh my God, I'm saying it, the third largest land deal in history. It doubled the size of the United States. So part of him says, small government, not a good idea, not constitutional. And then the other part of him says, and this is the American part of him, man, is this a bargain. And I cannot pass by a bargain. And it will solve forever the problem of those nasty French at our back door. Well, it doesn't solve the problem, because in the interim, remember who is vice president under Jefferson at that time, is Aaron Burr. Some of you may have seen that little musical about Alexander Hamilton, and Aaron Burr, and he had this duel, and Aaron Burr really has been much maligned through history, but he unfortunately just kind of walks into being maligned, you know. And then by 1805, he's going, I got a good idea, but he doesn't really directly state to anybody what that good idea is. He goes to what is now Parkersburg, it was Virginia at that time, now West Virginia. He meets up with Harmer Blennerhassett, and he says, you know, I'm thinking about raising some money and raising some soldiers, and I don't know what we'll do with the militia. Maybe we'll go down the river and get more people to join us. And oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll just kind of sort of maybe take over the Louisiana Purchase, and maybe do it with Spain, and maybe, you know, operate this area with Spain. And he got people from the Ohio River watershed to join his efforts, because they didn't care blazes as long as they had New Orleans open. You know, Washington was way over there across the mountains. And he was caught. Somebody, James Wilkinson, a general here in Kentucky, who was involved in the whole thing, like he was up to his ears and maybe underwater with the whole thing, right? He snitches on Aaron Burr. And then he kind of wiggles his way out of it, and they capture Aaron Burr and they put him up for trial in Richmond, Virginia. And John Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court says, I'm not seeing any smoking gun here, right? And he is actually let go. But it's all about, friends, the Ohio River Valley. I don't know why history was written from the viewpoint of Washington, D.C. or New York City, but it's all about us. And I could be wrong, but I think I've made a case that I'm right. The Northwest Territory was immense in size. It literally doubled our territory, and out of it came the estates of Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, etc. But the second result of the American War for Independence is war domestically with the Indian nations. And by this time, the Indians were putting together, and I'm using the term Indian because it's the Smithsonian, right, Museum of the American Indian, so it's a very, you know, indigenous peoples, Native Americans, Indian, you have to choose something, so I'm choosing something. Blue Jacket from the Shawnee and Little Turtle from the Miami and others were quite upset with the settlers moving in. So they send out to kind of settle the Northwest Territory General Josiah Harmer, and he establishes Fort Harmer, which is now Marietta, Fort Steuben, which was Steubenville, Fort Washington in Cincinnati, and then he figures it's time to go do a campaign against the Miami Indians, and he suffers a big defeat. So remember I promised you 2 defeats? There is the big defeat, first one. The second one is General Arthur St. Clair, who's the governor of the Northwest Territory, and after Harmer's defeat, he becomes the general in charge, and he then suffers St. Clair's defeat, which was and remains the largest defeat of the U.S. Army by American Indians. They finally choose a man called General Anthony Wayne, who was called in history Mad Anthony Wayne, and he won at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and usually people say 1795 is when you're racing the Indians out of Ohio and part of Indiana. So how does this all deal with us? Well, I've just given you just a tiny, tiny sliver of all the sorts of things that we're examining in the ORVILLE Project. The first thing that we have accomplished, and it's a continuing project, is a clearinghouse website, and we give it there for you. And please feel free to go there and see what we have up and running. The second thing is continuing our research and scholarship. Our Rich History welcomes all articles on the watershed itself. So We welcome articles about Boone County and all the other counties lining the Ohio River, and appreciate the great amount of work already being done by the Borderlands Institute here at the Boone County Public Library. This is available for free as well. But now, education K through 16. So we are committed to free, open access resources for teachers and students, and lesson plans for them as well. So basically what happened is, out of some meetings with the Kentucky Educational Development Corporation, or KEDC, which is a nonprofit, it sounds like it's not, but it's a nonprofit, representing many teachers in our watershed, they approached us and said, we really need lesson plans for 8th grade students. In the 8th grade in Kentucky, they study U.S. history before the Civil War, and actually through the Civil War. And then as 16-year-olds, as juniors in high school, they study U.S. history since the Civil War. And that I know pretty well because I've been teaching for a lot of years, and a lot of those years have been dual credit to Cooper High School, Grant County High School, Ryle High School, and others, dual credit U.S. history. And it's true. And they said the first thing we want to do is help relate U.S. history to our region. Because I think most of us probably learned history in our little neighborhood, right? In our little city, and our little community. And that was the first thing probably that got us excited about history, right? That we could see history and touch history and relate to history, that history would be relevant to us. And the truth is, they said, well, what about world history? Can you do it for world history? And we said, sure. Can you do it for American history? Absolutely. So now I have graduate students working on a range of topics that have been requested by teachers, and then the teachers are embedded in my graduate classes. And so they are telling us what they want and what a good lesson plan for 8th graders and for junior high students looks like, all tied to state standards. And those include interactive lessons and everything tech that you can imagine. So by the spring you will see a new project being unveiled, and it's called ORVILLE Flies. And there he is, he's flying. And look, he's got a bag of books, you know, about ready to fall out of his plane. And it stands for Free Library Interdisciplinary and Educational Sources. It is under construction, but we have already flown the first project out of it. And it is John Bowe. Do some of you know John Bowe?
Yes.
All right, John Bowe. A gentleman, John Bowe, did for years research on one of the 4 largest X-ray producers in the United States. They were GE, Westinghouse, the third one which I've now forgotten, and Kelly-Cat of Covington. And he did excellent research, and he approached us and said that he had been turned down by a major university press because they didn't figure it would sell that many copies, right? It was an esoteric topic. And we said, it's about innovation. We don't care if it's esoteric because we don't have to make money. We're not about making money. We're a free, open access resource. So it has been put together as a book. It is totally free. It's a PDF. It is our first open access free project on the ORVILLE site, a totally new scholarship. And it is available by going there, and it says X-Ray City, but it's also available as a print on demand, which we get no money for. And I don't think that John Bowe is going to become a wealthy man from either, okay? So if you haven't ordered it already for the library, it's absolutely there. So that's already out. In the making is Innovation Nation, the Ohio River Watershed, and the Making of America. We already have 13 chapters for that. They've already been edited. They're already going into press books, and they should be up and running by January. Again, totally free. And then the next project is Immigration Nation, the Ohio River Watershed, and it's actually renamed, and the Remaking of America it's called, and it should be out the following year. And that also will be free and open access. And that one we will be working with one of the largest public history centers in Europe from the University of Luxembourg. And they're going to look at immigration from the European side, and we're going to look at it from the United States side. So that should be an interesting project. So what we're trying to do is to bring more positive enrichment to our Ohio River Basin. The Ohio River Basin Confluence, in case you have nothing else to do, is being held October 16th through 18th in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the first time that 5 major institutions, organizations, working with the Ohio River are coming together, this time at the International Convention Center in downtown Louisville. One of them is Ohio River Way, of which I've already spoken. The other one is the Ohio River Basin Alliance, which is the scientist side of it. And they have produced just recently a massive report, and they are meeting with U.S. senators and representatives, and already have a collaboration on both sides of the aisle for requesting funds for conservation of the river. The University of Louisville, Thomas More University, and Kentucky Waterways Association. It's October 16th through 18th in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's where I end. Ideas and questions, feel free to get a hold of us, or I'll be happy to entertain your questions now. Wow.
Very good.
That means either I was so thorough that I've answered all the questions you might possibly have, or I've totally bored you and you're half asleep. And that's okay too, because putting people to sleep is a good thing. You're supposed to get 8 solid hours of sleep a day. Doesn't matter when you get it, naps count. Naps count. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please.